Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, and first of all, thank you so much for all the support. We've just reached 300 subscribers and we're really happy to see this channel growing. For those who are new here, I'm Davide, but you can call me Dave, and on this channel, Claudia and I share our travel tips and experiences from all the destinations we visit. We've been working remotely for a few years now, and one of our biggest passions is traveling and creating videos along the way. So, if you enjoy travel guides, practical tips, and discovering new destinations with us, make sure to subscribe and follow along. And if you want to support us and our travels, we've also left some links in the description, where you can use our discount codes to save some money on things like eSIMs, car rentals, excursions, and travel insurance. Every little bit helps us keep traveling and creating more videos for you, so thank you. Now, let's get into today's video. If you're planning a trip to Malta, one of the most unique destinations in the Mediterranean, this video is for you. Today, we're sharing 9 things we wish we knew before visiting Malta. These are practical tips, small surprises, and a few things that can completely change the way you experience the islands. Because Malta might look small on the map, but there's actually much more to it than you might expect. And some things you definitely want to know before you go. So, if you're visiting Malta for the first time, make sure to watch until the end. Alright, let's start with the first one. The first thing we wish we knew before visiting Malta is that Malta isn't actually just one island. When people say Malta, they usually mean the country and the main island. But Malta is actually an archipelago made up of 3 main islands: Malta, Gozo, and Comino. And they all offer a pretty different experience. Malta is the largest island, and where you'll find places like Valletta, Mdina, the 3 cities, St. Julian's, and most of the main attractions. Then you have Gozo, which feels much more relaxed and rural. It's greener, quieter, and has a completely different atmosphere from the main island. And then there's Comino, the tiny island famous for the blue lagoon and its incredibly clear water. So, if you're staying in Malta for several days, don't make the mistake of spending your entire trip on the main island. One of the best things you can do is dedicate at least a day to Gozo and visit Comino if you're interested in swimming and boat trips. And honestly, this is one of the reasons why we don't think Malta should be treated as just a quick 2-day destination, because there is so much more than the main island. And this brings us to the second thing we wish we knew. Malta is tiny, but you can easily spend a week here. When you first look at a map of Malta, you might think, okay, it's so small, 3 days should be more than enough. But once you start planning your trip, you realize there is actually a lot to do. You can explore Valletta and its historic streets, visit Mdina, discover the 3 cities, spend a day in Gozo, visit Comino and the Blue Lagoon, go on a boat trip, explore caves, go snorkeling or diving, visit beaches, watch the sunset, or even explore Gozo by quad. The good thing is that you don't have to choose between history and nature. You can spend the morning exploring ancient temples, the afternoon swimming in the Mediterranean, and the evening walking through a historic city. And another thing that surprised us is that some activities can actually be quite affordable, especially compared with other popular Mediterranean destinations. Of course, prices depend on the season and the type of experience, but don't assume that every activity in Malta is going to be extremely expensive. So yes, Malta is small, but don't let the size of the islands make you underestimate how much you can actually do here. The third thing we wish we knew is that you don't necessarily need to rent a car in Malta. Malta has an extensive public bus network. It connects many of the main tourist areas and attractions. So, if you're staying in places like Valletta, Sliema, St. Julian's or other popular areas, you can get around by bus without having to rent a car. And if you're staying for several days, there are also travel cards and passes that can make public transport more convenient and potentially cheaper than paying for single tickets. We actually think this is something worth checking before your trip, especially if you plan to use buses frequently. But if you decide to rent a car, there's one very important thing to know. Malta drives on the left. Yes, just like in the UK. So, if you're coming from most of continental Europe or from the US, driving here can take a little bit of getting used to. And it's not only this side of the road. You also have traffic, narrow streets, and depending on where you're staying, parking can be a challenge. So, don't automatically assume that renting a car is the easiest option. For many travelers, especially if it's your first time in Malta, public transport can actually be enough. But if you're traveling with your family or a group of people, you can check in the link in the description the car rentals option available, or even scooters or motorcycles if you'd like that option. The fourth thing we wish we knew is about when to visit Malta. Because when you think about Malta, you probably think about July and August. Summer, sunshine, beaches, swimming. And yes, Malta is beautiful in summer. But if you don't have to travel during the school holidays, we would seriously consider May or October. Why? Because you can get much more comfortable temperatures, fewer crowds, and potentially better prices. And you can still enjoy the sea depending on the weather and your luck. July and August can be extremely hot and very busy, especially considering how tiny these islands are. And when you combine high temperatures with crowds at the most famous attractions, the experience can be very different from what you see on Instagram. May and October can give you a much more relaxed experience, but even September, sometimes April, could be a great option. You can explore cities without feeling like you're melting, walk around during the day, and still enjoy Malta's beaches and outdoor activities. So if you have some flexibility with your dates, don't automatically choose July or August. Sometimes the best time to visit isn't the obvious one. Number 5, Malta is a mix of cultures, and you can see it everywhere. This is probably one of the things we found most interesting about Malta, because before visiting, you might hear that Malta has a strong British influence. And that's true. You drive on the left, English is one of the official languages, and you'll notice British influences in everyday life. But Malta isn't simply British. It's actually a fascinating mix of cultures that have shaped the islands over thousands of years. Because of Malta's position in the middle of the Mediterranean, many different civilizations have passed through here. Phoenicians, Romans, Arabs, the Knights of St. John, the British, and you can still see these influences today. You can see them in the architecture, the language, the food, the names of places, the fortifications, and even the way people drive. But one of the most important chapters of Malta's history is the story of the Knights of St. John. In 1565, the Ottoman Empire attacked Malta in what became known as the Great Siege of Malta. The Knights and the Maltese defenders managed to hold them off, and just 1 year later, they started building a completely new fortified city. The city was Valletta, and here's something we found really interesting. Valletta wasn't a city that slowly grew over hundreds of years. It was basically planned and built as a fortress city from the beginning. The streets were laid out in a grid, huge bastions were built around the peninsula, and the whole city was designed with defense in mind. So, when you're walking through Valletta today, you're not just walking through a beautiful European capital, you're basically walking through a 16th century fortress that became a city. And even the name tells part of the story. Valletta was named after Jean de Valette, the Grand Master who led the knights during the Great Siege. And here's another crazy detail. He died only 2 years after construction of the city began, so he never saw Valletta fully completed. So, when you walk around Valletta, you're literally walking through a city that was born from one of the most important battles in Malta's history. And that's what makes Malta so interesting. You're in a Mediterranean country, but at the same time, you can see Italian, Arab, European, and British influences almost everywhere. It's basically the result of thousands of years of history compressed into a very small group of islands. Number 6, Malta has places older than the pyramids. And this one is probably going to surprise you. Some of Malta's archaeological sites are older than the Egyptian pyramids. Yes, older than the pyramids. Malta is home to some incredible prehistoric megalithic temples built thousands of years ago. And we're talking about structures that are more than 5,000 years old. Which means that when you visit some of these places, you're looking at structures built by people who lived here long before the pyramids of Egypt. And this is something that can easily get overlooked because most people associate Malta with beaches, blue water, movida, and summer holidays. But Malta has one of the oldest prehistoric archaeological stories in Europe. So if you're interested in history, don't spend your entire trip looking for beaches. Take some time to visit at least one of these ancient sites, because it's honestly crazy to think about how old they actually are. Number 7, the Blue Lagoon is nothing like Instagram in summer. Now let's talk about probably the most famous place in Malta, the Blue Lagoon. You've probably already seen it. Crystal clear turquoise water, beautiful rocky coastline, boats, sunshine. It looks like paradise. And don't get us wrong, the water really is incredibly beautiful, but there's something you should know before you go. The Blue Lagoon can get extremely crowded during the summer, like really crowded. So the experience you see on Instagram with a beautiful empty lagoon and nobody around is not necessarily what you're going to get in July or August. During peak season, you can have boats arriving constantly, people swimming everywhere, tours arriving, and very little space around the most popular areas. So if the Blue Lagoon is one of the main reasons you're visiting Malta, keep this in mind. And if you have some flexibility, going outside the busiest periods can make a huge difference, because the place itself is beautiful. It's the crowds that can completely change the experience. Number 8, Malta became famous for partying, maybe too famous. Another thing we wish we knew before visiting Malta is that the island has a very strong party reputation, especially because of Paceville. If you heard about Malta through international students, Erasmus programs, or young travelers, you've probably heard about the nightlife here. Paceville is packed with bars, clubs, and nightlife, and during summer it can get very busy. But here's the thing, Malta is not Paceville. If you've never been here, it's easy to imagine the entire island as one giant party destination. It really isn't. You can spend your day walking through the quiet streets of Mdina, you can explore Valletta, you can take a boat around the coast, you can visit Gozo and find much quieter areas. You can watch the sunset, explore small villages, visit archaeological sites, or simply spend the day at the beach. So if you're not interested in partying, don't let Malta's nightlife reputation put you off. And if you're interested in partying, well, Paceville is definitely there for you as one of the options, but it's just one side of Malta. And finally, something we absolutely didn't expect before visiting Malta. Malta is basically a giant movie set. In the past, this country has been used as a giant movie set for different movies. One of the most famous examples is Popeye Village. And here's the crazy part. The village was actually built as a movie set for the 1980s film Popeye. Today, it's one of Malta's most recognizable attractions, but Malta has also been used as a filming location for many other productions, including Game of Thrones and several major movies and TV shows. And once you start exploring the islands, it actually makes sense. You have historic cities, dramatic cliffs, old fortifications, Mediterranean landscapes, tiny villages, and incredibly photogenic coastlines. So Malta can basically transform into completely different places depending on where you're standing. And if you are a movie or TV fan, it's worth checking which locations were filmed here before your trip. You might recognize a place without even realizing where you've seen it before. So those were 9 things we wish we knew before visiting Malta. Malta might be a very small country, but as you can see, there is a lot more to it than beautiful beaches and crystal clear water. It's an archipelago, it's incredibly rich in history, and there are so many different experiences packed into such a small area. And hopefully knowing these things before your trip will help you plan a better experience and avoid some of the surprises we had. Now, let us know, have you already been to Malta? And if you've been, what's one thing you wish you knew before visiting? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned, because in the next weeks we're going to share new videos about this country and destination for more practical tips and places to visit. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.